the 28th of February, 1948, the British rulers of the Gold Coast region in Africa met an unprecedented shock. A group of ex-servicemen who had fought for the British in the Second World War marched towards the government office in Accra, the capital of the Gold Coast. The procession, which started in an orderly manner, was quickly hijacked by rowdy delinquents and soon degenerated into a threatening mob. They started the procession with the aim of marching towards the Secretariat office. But due to the turn of events, the ex-servicemen took the road leading towards Christenborg Castle, the residence of the colonial governor. A small detachment of armed police officers, led by Superintendent Colin Imray, blocked the procession at the crossroads. Imray ordered the servicemen to stop, but they refused and continued to advance. Seeing this, the superintendent ordered one of his officers to shoot at the protesters, but this officer flatly refused. For fear of being overrun by the protesters, Imray tore a rifle out of the hands of one of his men and fired at one of the protesters, killing him instantly. He then fired 5 successive shots, resulting in the deaths of 3 ex-servicemen, Sergeant Francis Ajete, Corporal Patrick Adepo, and Private Odarte Lamptey. With the lifeless bodies of their comrades on the ground, the remaining protesters quickly turned around and made off towards the center of Accra. Violence was unleashed in full force. The angry mob set cars on fire, looted stores owned by foreign merchants, moved against the prisons, broke down the doors, and released the prisoners. Within days, the riot broke out in towns throughout the colony, leaving 29 dead and over 200 injured. A group of educated professionals and intellectuals from the Gold Coast, under the name of the United Gold Coast Convention, immediately sent a telegram to the colonial office in London, demanding a commission and offering to form a government.
The Working Committee of the United Gold Coast Convention declares that they are prepared and ready to take over the interim government.
On hearing this, the colonial governor, Sir Gerald Creasy, arrested all the leaders of the UGCC, declared a state of emergency, and promulgated the Riot Act. This event would mark the beginning of Ghana's journey towards independence and set in motion the African Revolution. The man who would eventually play an important role in this revolution would be one of the leaders of the UGCC, the person of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah.
Freedom! We begin in West Africa, one of the 2 great areas of the world where we have ruled but never settled.
By the end of the Second World War, the Gold Coast seemed to be a happy and contented colony, enjoying more prosperity than most parts of Africa. Cocoa farming was the backbone of the region's economy, as it produced 2/3 of the world's supply. At this juncture, the colony had reached a level of political sophistication that was unmatched anywhere in Africa. The 1946 Gold Coast Constitution saw Africans having a majority in the Legislative Council for the first time. Seen as a major step towards self-government, this new arrangement prompted the colony's first true political party, the United Gold Coast Convention, which was founded in August 1947. The leaders, considered the founding fathers of the present-day Ghana, were collectively known as the Big Six. They included Joseph Boakie Dankwa, Ebenezer Akko-Adjei, Edward Akufo-Addo, Emmanuel Obetsebi Lamptey, William Ofori-Atta, and Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, the party secretary. The Gold Coast at the time was seen as one of the most stable colonies in the whole of Africa. But underneath this superficial calm and prosperity, several worrying factors emerged in the years that followed immediately after the Second World War. The biggest threat to the Gold Coast economy came from a disease called swollen shoot, which attacked the cocoa trees and was carried by the mealybug. It was first identified in the region around 1943, but despite prolonged research, no remedy could be found. The only way to prevent the spread of the disease was to cut out the infected trees. The government rightly saw the swollen shoot as a dire threat to the economy and enacted the cutting out policy. Under this policy, farmers were mandated to cut down and burn any infected trees. But these infected trees continued to produce healthy-looking pods for some time, and the cocoa farmers bitterly resented the policy. Swollen shoots certainly created a crisis in the cocoa-growing areas of the Gold Coast, but the next problem affected the whole colony. This problem was inflation. The government was even more inept when handling this problem. Shortage of shipping meant that many imported goods, which had become essential in everyday life, could not be obtained. The increase in the price of cocoa meant that there was more money in circulation, but only a few things to buy. The culprits of the inflation were the European and Syrian trading companies that handled the majority of imports and exports. They came together after the war to form a group known as the Association of West African Martians. As middlemen, they could always offset inflation, and their continued prosperity caused deep resentment among the indigenous traders. One man, a Ga chief in the Accra region called Kwame Nkrumah, who was not only a prosperous businessman, but was also a strong civic leader, came forward and channeled the anger and frustration that most people in the country felt. He spoke effectively against the European and Syrian Martians, and he quickly gained fervent support across the country. He proposed that, unless the British and Syrian stores reduced their prices, he would instigate a complete boycott of the imported goods. And on the 24th of January 1948, the boycott of all imported goods began and held up remarkably well. As a result, the members of the Association of West African Martians agreed to cut down their high profit margins and put an end to the boycott. The strong feelings generated by the boycott and the swollen shoot disease lingered on for a while and finally amalgamated with the third and greatest issue in the colony, the grievances of the ex-servicemen. A total of 63,000 ex-servicemen who fought on the side of the British during the Second World War returned home with high expectations for their future. But then, they had trouble obtaining employment and felt that the federal government wasn't doing enough to address their grievances. In February 1948, they met with the heads of the UGCC, and after which, they felt the need to express their grievances to the governor. On the 28th of February 1948, the exact day marking the end of the boycott, a group of ex-servicemen marched towards the government office in Accra in a showdown that resulted in the Accra riots of 1948. The leaders of the UGCC were held responsible for orchestrating the disturbance and detained, only to be released a month later. Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, the party's secretary, received severe backlash from the leaders of the UGCC for his role in the riots. But overall, the arrest of the Big Six raised the profile of the party around the country and made them national heroes. The British government set up a commission known as the Watson Commission to investigate the cause of the riots and the events of February 1948. The commission highlighted the inadequacies of Governor Creasy and recommended that another commission be set up to draft a new constitution. This new commission, known as the Coup Commission, employed the services of all the leaders of the UGCC, with the exception of Nkrumah, in drafting the new constitution. But while the committee was preparing its report, there was a split in the ranks of the United Gold Coast Convention. Before the creation of the Coup Commission, there was a rift between Nkrumah and the other leaders of the UGCC, and Nkrumah's exclusion from the commission did nothing but exacerbate it. Nkrumah's views on independence and how the party should be run were at variance with those of the others. While the UGCC paraded the slogan of self-government in the shortest possible time, Nkrumah believed in self-government now. As a result of his variant views and his unwillingness to obey some of the party's codes of conduct, Nkrumah was dismissed as the secretary of the UGCC and demoted to the humble role of the party's treasurer. To share his perspectives on independence, Nkrumah created a print media known as the Accra Evening News. It was devoted entirely to the struggle against imperialism. This newspaper went on to make a considerable impact throughout the colony. While the Accra Evening News was gaining immense popularity from Nkrumah, his close colleagues set up a nationwide youth organization called the Committee on Youth Organization. It was initially a part of the UGCC, but as it grew in prominence, it became a separate entity. Encouraged by Nkrumah, the CYO adopted the slogan of "Self-Government Now" and continued to grow in power. Finally, in July 1949, Kwame Nkrumah completely left the UGCC and announced to a huge crowd the formation of the Convention People's Party. It outlined the struggle for independence since 1947 and stressed the importance of self-government now. With this, Nkrumah immediately gained the overwhelming support of the masses. Nkrumah went on to organize an effective modern political party that was radical, forward-looking, and aggressive. Soon, the party colors of red, white, and green appeared in every town and village on the Gold Coast. The writing on the wall was, "Self-Government Now." 2 months after the formation of the CPP, a new governor arrived at the castle, Sir Charles Arden Clarke. Within weeks of his arrival, he faced his first crisis. Kwame Nkrumah and the CPP had threatened the government with strikes and civil disobedience, which they called positive action. This action, similar to the one staged by Mahatma Gandhi in India, encouraged all local workers to stay out of work until their demand for self-governance was met. The support for the positive action was widespread, and the government feared that the violence and strikes would bring the country to a grinding halt. Even after having a meeting with the colonial government and being promised a general election within 6 months, Nkrumah nonetheless declared positive action. Faced with the threat of positive action and a general strike, Sir Adam Clarke called an emergency meeting with the Legislative Council and imposed a state of emergency. As a result, Nkrumah and some leaders of the CPP were arrested. The violence during the positive action led to the deaths of 2 policemen who had been killed by a CPP mob. The court charged Nkrumah with inciting the people to take part in an illegal strike and trying to coerce the government. He was sentenced to 1 year's imprisonment on each charge. He was then taken to another court on the Cape Coast, where he received a further 1-year sentence for sedition in connection with a newspaper article. The 3 one-year sentences were to be served consecutively. After the trial at the Cape Coast, Nkrumah was brought back to the James Fort Prison in Accra, where he joined 10 other CPP leaders. With the CPP leaders in jail, the British expected that the UGCC would have a clear run to victory in the forthcoming election. But it wasn't going to come so easily. By a remarkable coincidence, as Kwame Nkrumah entered prison, Komla Gbedema, one of his most trusted friends and colleagues, had just completed a 6-month sentence for publishing false information on the Accra Evening News and was about to get released. They both had a brief discussion, and Gbedema agreed to organize the party while Nkrumah and the others were in prison. Nkrumah insisted that the CPP should contest all the seats in the forthcoming election of February 1951. He also ensured that his name appeared on the electoral roll since, as an elector, he was entitled to stand as a candidate. This was possible because his prison sentences were given for 1 year each, and under the Coup Commission, only a sentence of more than 1 year disqualifies a person from voting or standing in an election. Gbedema had the knack for organization, and soon the CPP colors sprang everywhere in the Gold Coast with a clear demand for self-government now. By the end of the election, Nkrumah's CPP emerged victorious. And even though he was still in jail, with another 2 years to serve his sentence, the governor finally decided that Nkrumah should be released from the James Fort Prison at 1 o'clock on Monday, the 12th of February, 1951.
A huge crowd cheers as Kwame Nkrumah leaves James Fort Prison freed by the governor as an act of grace on the eve of the inauguration of the new constitution.
The following day, the governor sent for Nkrumah and asked him to form a government. Nkrumah took up the title of the leader of government business in a cabinet shared by Sir Adam Clarke and became the prime minister in 1952 when the governor withdrew from the cabinet. As prime minister, he continued to seek constitutional reforms that would lead to independence. In 1954, the second Gold Coast election was announced, and the CPP leaders were left in no doubt about its significance. You see, the previous election of 1951 was just to establish the government. But after several discussions with the British government, it was agreed that if the CPP won the 1954 elections, independence would follow. With independence in sight, Nkrumah and his ministers began to launch their manifestos in Accra and various regions of the Gold Coast, telling voters to vote for the CPP to finish the job. After the election, the CPP won more than 2/3 of the seats in the Legislative Assembly. Independence was now in sight. For the first time in the British colony, Africans were given control of an entire cabinet.
On this eventful occasion, my colleagues and I are very happy to be the first members of the first African cabinet. The people of the country have reaffirmed their confidence in us and have given us the mandate to carry on and finish the job.
Nkrumah's hopes for a trouble-free transition to independence were soon destroyed by the leaders of the Ashanti region. The Ashanti had been amongst the greatest warriors in Africa and once ruled an empire as large as the Gold Coast. The area was also one of the wealthiest in the Gold Coast, rich in cocoa and gold. Within weeks of the election, the leaders of the Ashanti launched the National Liberation Movement to battle for a federal system of government and protect the power, wealth, and tradition of their region from the central government in Accra. It was led by Baffour Akoto, one of their senior ministers. The northern territories of the Gold Coast were also in favor of a federal system of government to protect their region, as they were the poorest and least developed part of the Gold Coast. Their chiefs were strongly opposed to the idea of rapid independence and feared that the benevolent protection of the British would soon be replaced by the domination of black men from the South. The back and forth of these opposing ideas birthed the formation of the Northern People's Party in the North. In Ashanti, the National Liberation Movement soon became a powerful political force and a serious threat to Nkrumah's aim of a smooth run to independence. Soon, some high-profile members of the CPP began to leave the party for the NLM. Violence soon became the order of the day in Ashanti as the National Liberation Movement and the CPP created strong armed gangs to travel the region, threatening each other. These gangs were known as the Action Groupers and the Action Troopers, respectively. Their intimidation turned to killings when, in October 1954, E.Y. Baffour, an official for the National Liberation Movement and a defector from the CPP, was murdered by Tumasi Ankra of the CPP. The political parties were now facing each other in a full-blown gang warfare. The action groupers of the National Liberation Movement took control of key areas in Ashanti, forcing the CPP supporters in the Ashanti capital of Kumasi to flee and take refuge in Accra. The violence got so bad that it became unsafe for Nkrumah and his ministers to visit the Ashanti region. In curbing the violence in the Ashanti region, Sir Arden Clark decided to pay a visit to the ruler of the Ashanti Kingdom, but he faced an angry crowd of protesters, some of whom attacked his car on his way back from the visit. The people of Ashanti criticized the governor for his unwavering support for Nkrumah and the CPP. Nkrumah was falsely reminded of the intensity in Ashanti when, at the height of the crisis, there was a serious attempt to assassinate him. While sitting in his house one evening, along with his secretary and a few colleagues, a large explosion blew through all the windows. Luckily for Nkrumah, he escaped unhurt. The police reported that had the explosive been set up correctly, it would have been enough to raze down the entire building. After 2 years of constant violence, the National Liberation Movement managed to convince the colonial secretary, Allen Lennox Boyd, that another election must be held. Although the CPP didn't like this, the election took place in 1956. Again, the CPP won with a massive majority. Still, the National Liberation Movement wasn't prepared to give up. They refused to take their seats in the Legislative Assembly, refused to discuss independence, and insisted on embarking on the federal system. This time, the British government rejected their request. The rejection caused a furious reaction in the Ashanti, and talks were made about breaking away from the Gold Coast. Worried by the reports that the colony was on the brink of a civil war, the colonial secretary decided to talk with the rulers of the Ashanti region. Finally, they agreed that some elements of power for the region must be included in the new constitution. In September 1956, Nkrumah announced that full independence would follow in 6 months and that the new state would be called Ghana, named after the great empire of the 11th century. On the 6th of March 1957, Ghana became the first Black African country to gain independence.
At long last, the battle has ended. And thus, Ghana, your beloved country, is free forever. And now, there is a new African in the world. That new African is ready to fight his own battle and show that after all, the black man is capable of managing his own affairs.
Finally, Nkrumah's call for independence had been achieved, and with it came a certain calm from the opposition. But this calm, which was welcomed all over the country, did not last for long. Nkrumah had only a short honeymoon before unrest gradually started spreading amongst his people. Almost as soon as independence was achieved, severe disturbances began taking place in the Togoland region of Ghana. This unrest, known as the Alavanyo riots, saw threats of violence flying in the air. One of Nkrumah's first acts after independence was to dispatch police and troops to suppress the insurrection. Shortly after, there was another revolt among the Ga people in Accra, who believed that members of the other tribes were getting preferential treatment in different government positions. Nkrumah responded by repressing the local movements and enacting the Avoidance of Discrimination Act of December 1957, which banned political parties from operating on the regional, tribal, and religious basis. Further unrest in the Ashanti and other minority regions led to the Preventive Detention Act of 1958, under which suspects could be imprisoned without trial for up to 5 years. This act in particular was used and abused on an ever-increasing scale as it grew on to become the most notorious instrument of oppression throughout Nkrumah's regime. For months, Nkrumah managed to destroy nearly all the Ashanti chiefs who supported the National Liberation Movement and replaced them with CPP supporters. These rather sinister moves, coming so soon after independence, alarmed all the opposition members who saw the power of the CPP as a growing menace. Prompted by these worrying developments, and by the clear intentions of the Avoidance of Discrimination Act, the opposition parties came together to form the United Party in November 1957 under the leadership of Kofi Abrefa Busia. On the 20th of December 1958, Nkrumah was about to set off on an official visit to India when a plot to assassinate him at the airport was discovered. The plot centered around 2 opposing figures who allegedly approached the commandant at the military camp near Accra and offered him money to get his troops to take part in the assassination. On the night of the planned assassination, They moved silently to a rendezvous location that had easy access to both the military camp and the center of Accra. There, they waited anxiously for the remaining group to arrive. After a considerable time, a vehicle approached. Expecting their fellow conspirators to get out, they were taken completely by surprise when members of the security force sprang out and arrested them. They had been betrayed by one of their conspirators. Whether Nkrumah knew of the plot or not is not known, but he decided to continue with his visit to India. Slowly but surely, during the course of his regime, Nkrumah's real plans began to emerge. He began to implement his socialist views, which he had always openly expressed, but weren't prominently accepted during the struggle for independence. Now, he intended that Ghana should become a socialist state, and soon realized that to achieve this, he had to surmount serious difficulties. He started to align himself and the country with the Eastern Bloc, resulting in his unpopularity with the West. But by and large, his genuine attempt to create a socialist state must be accounted for as a complete failure. He spoke of idealism and integrity, but the message never really got across. The greatest single contribution to the failure of all his schemes lies in his indifference to financial issues and his refusal to demand honest accounting. This opened the floodgates to corruption at every level. The issue of finance created serious tensions between him and Komla Gbedema, who was of immense help during the struggle for independence. Having organized the 1951 election when Nkrumah was in prison, Gbedema guided the financial affairs of the party and the government from then on. Now, as the finance minister, he became increasingly alarmed at Nkrumah's irresponsible attitude towards finance. After Ghana became a republic in 1960 and Nkrumah became president, more restraints were removed, and the situation became increasingly worse, creating numerous clashes between Gbedema and Nkrumah. A showdown had to come when, in early 1961, Gbedema could no longer balance the budget. He was summarily removed from the Ministry of Finance and demoted to the Minister of Health. By this time, Nkrumah suspected Gbedema of planning to stage a coup against him, and he had proof. Some declassified documents released by the Central Intelligence Agency showed that Gbedema had indeed been planning to stage a coup and had gotten in touch with them. But he later backed off from the actual decision when one of his supporters telephoned the details to the United States on an open line, which was tapped by the Ghanaian police. Gbedema's position grew more precarious, and fearing for his life, he went into exile. In the early phase of Nkrumah's regime, one man rose to a position of influence in the CPP that was only surpassed by Nkrumah himself. This man was Tawiah Adamafio. He started as a member of the CPP and rose to become its general secretary. In 1960, he became the Information and Broadcasting Minister and also the Minister of Presidential Affairs. This was an influential position in the government at that time and brought him very close to Nkrumah. Inside the CPP, Adamafio and his group created a cult of personality that threatened to deal mercilessly with the enemies of Nkrumah. His intense and ruthless ambition and his determination to remove any possible rival of Kwame Nkrumah had created a dangerous circle of enemies even within the CPP. Many suspected that his ambition included the removal of Nkrumah himself. An event that would give his enemy the upper hand and put a question mark on his loyalty to Nkrumah occurred in a small town in the Upper East region of Ghana called Kulungugu. In early August 1962, Nkrumah traveled with a large contingent to Baku, a town in the Upper East region of Ghana, in preparation for his official visit to Burkina Faso. From Baku, he traveled to a small town of Tenkundugu, and here he completed the formal agreements with President Yameogo of Burkina Faso. Nkrumah's convoy was approaching Kulungugu when they heard a loud bang. Nkrumah had been injured in a grenade attack. It happened that a schoolmaster got Nkrumah to stop to receive a bouquet from a pupil, but while the pupil presented the bouquet, a grenade was thrown, instantly killing the child. Nkrumah was hit by a flying metal and was immediately rushed to the hospital. On the 28th of August, Adamafio and 2 others were arrested for their alleged connection with the attack. The sole evidence against the alleged plotters was that they rode in cars well behind Nkrumah. The 3 major suspects in the plot faced a street trial, and by the end of it, they were found to be not guilty. This came as a shock to Nkrumah, who believed that Adamafio had a hand in the grenade attack, and so he swiftly overreacted. 2 days after the verdict, Nkrumah dismissed the Chief Justice and rushed the bill through the Assembly, which gave him the power to set aside a judgment in the country's court, invariably allowing a second trial. At the second trial, all 3 men were convicted and sentenced to death, though these sentences were subsequently commuted to life imprisonment. More than anything else, the rapid demolition of the independence of the judiciary convinced the world that Nkrumah had embarked on a course leading to dictatorship. The assassination attempt at Kulungugu affected almost every aspect of Nkrumah's policy and outlook. A proposal had been made at a CPP conference just before the Kulungugu incident that Ghana should be a one-party state. In the emotional aftermath of Kulungugu, this proposal was enthusiastically endorsed. After the assassination attempt in Kulungugu, Nkrumah began to spend less time at the flat staff house and instead sought refuge at the Christenborg Castle. Here, another attempt was made on his life. On the 2nd of January 1964, at about 1:15 p.m., President Nkrumah was about to move from the flat staff house to Christenborg Castle for lunch when Police Constable Seth Amatewi, who was on guard duty, fired several shots at him. Luckily for Nkrumah, his ADC, Police Superintendent Salifu Dagarty, a British-trained Ghanaian veteran officer, saved him by stepping in as a shield, receiving all the bullets on his behalf. Salifu died instantly. Constable Amatewi was eventually overpowered and arrested. Following the incident, Nkrumah barred the police from the presidential guard duties and replaced them with Ghanaian officers trained and equipped by the Russian government. The physical attacks on Nkrumah inevitably compelled him to enforce the Preventive Detention Act with an iron hand, jailing without trial people whose deeds were deemed detrimental to the security of the state. On the 8th of January 1964, J.B. Dankwa, Nkrumah's former colleague at the UGCC, was linked with Constable Amatewi's assassination attempt and consequently arrested. He was put in prison under the Preventive Detention Act until his death on the 4th of February 1965. Constable Amatewi, the 23-year-old police officer, was sentenced to death for the attempted murder of Nkrumah and the death of Superintendent Salifu Dagarty. From one assassination attempt to another, Nkrumah became deeply paranoid. He felt he had lost favor in the sight of his people. Abroad, he rubbed shoulders with some of the world's leaders as the first Black African to lead an African colony to independence. But at home, his status had changed from the glorified title of Osajifo, the Redeemer, to that of a dictator. Even the military was becoming increasingly dissatisfied with Nkrumah. Rumors of coups involving the military were recorded from the spring and early summer of 1965. On the 21st of February 1966, President Nkrumah left the country for a diplomatic meeting with Ho Chi Minh, the leader of North Vietnam. He traveled first to China. In his absence, a group called the National Liberation Council, led by Major General Joseph Ankara, Lieutenant Colonel Emmanuel Kotoka, Major Akwasi Afrifa, and Police Commissioner J.W.K. Harley, mobilized a group of about 600 soldiers stationed in the northern part of the country and ordered them to start moving south towards Accra. On their way, the coup leaders told the soldiers that they were going to be deployed in Rhodesia to fight against the white government of Ian Smith. But when they got to Accra, the plotters made their true intentions known. They were divided into separate groups in order to capture various strategic government buildings. With the Chief of Defense Staff being at an OAU meeting, the highest-ranking officer present, General Charles Barwa, was reportedly shot dead when he refused to cooperate with the coup plotters. All hell broke loose at the presidential residence, as the presidential guards didn't intend on letting the plotters have their way without putting up a formidable resistance. But in the end, the presidential guards were finally overpowered, and the coup became a success. On the 24th of February 1966, at exactly 6 a.m., Colonel Kotoka informed the public of the coup and the overthrow of Nkrumah's government over the radio. According to the military, 20 members of the presidential guards were killed, and over 25 were wounded. Other sources suggested a death toll of more than that. Almost immediately, Major General Nkrumah, who had been dismissed by Nkrumah, was brought in to head the revolutionary government. The motive of the military in carrying out the coup was a shared general dissatisfaction with the corruption and mismanagement of Nkrumah's regime. The National Liberation Council quickly began to round up known CPP leaders, many of whom seemed to have disappeared overnight. Various reports showed that the CIA maintained contact and was well briefed by those who plotted the coup. Behind the scenes, they were satisfied with the information gathered from the coup, but they put on a public front to vehemently deny ever setting the coup in motion or taking part in the coup. News of the coup and the overthrow of Nkrumah was met with jubilation all over the country. The new government appealed to Ghanaians who had fled from Nkrumah's tyranny to return and help build a new Ghana. They also cut ties with the Eastern Bloc and appealed to all their neighboring countries and the West for a fresh start to good relations. When Nkrumah received the news of the coup in China, he was stunned, but maintained self-control and stayed back in Beijing for 4 days. Various countries offered him hospitality, but he accepted the offer of President Sékou Touré of Guinea, where he would be reasonably close to Ghana. Touré made him the joint head of state in Guinea, a gesture he greatly appreciated. Nkrumah never returned to Ghana, but he continued to push for his vision of African unity. Despite retirement from public office, Nkrumah continued to live in constant paranoia and felt he was still threatened by Western intelligence agencies. When his cook died mysteriously, he feared that someone would poison him, and he began hoarding food in his room. He suspected that foreign agents were going through his mail and constantly lived in fear of abduction and assassination. Due to failing health, he flew to Romania for medical treatment in August 1971. On the 27th of April 1972, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, Ghana's first president and leader of the African Revolution, died of prostate cancer at the age of 62. 3 days later, his body was flown to Guinea, where President Sékou Touré paid him a generous tribute. Touré tried to negotiate with the Ghanaian government under General Acheampong for a dignified ceremony for the return of Nkrumah's body to Ghana. His request was initially refused, but later granted after intense pressure from Nkrumah's family and other African leaders. On the 7th of July 1972, his coffin was flown to Accra, where it lay in state before its burial at Nkroful. His remains were later transferred to a large national memorial tomb in Accra. In truth, Nkrumah made a lot of mistakes, but in the future, these were largely forgotten. The whole of Africa continues to remember him as the leader who sought a united Africa free from the shackles of colonialism. This, he championed strongly for the promotion of Pan-Africanism, a worldwide movement aimed at encouraging and strengthening the bonds between all indigenous and diaspora people of African ancestry. He was inspired by the writings of Black intellectuals like Marcus Garvey, W.E.B. Du Bois, and George Padmore, and maintained a good relationship with them. In all, his hopes were encapsulated in his ultimate goal of a united Africa in which its rich natural resources would be used for the benefit of all its people and would not be flinched from them by foreign financiers and other sneaky exploiters. It may take centuries for Nkrumah's goal to be achieved, but when it does happen, he will be revered as the leader with the dynamism and intelligent imagination to take the first brave steps. The final tribute to Kwame Nkrumah comes from Amilcar Cabral, the great patriot and freedom fighter from Guinea-Bissau.
Nobody can tell us that Nkrumah died of cancer of the throat or some other illness. No, Nkrumah died of the cancer of betrayal. For us, the best homage we Africans can render to the immortal memory of Kwame Nkrumah is to strengthen vigilance at all levels of the struggle, to intensify it, and to liberate the whole of Africa.
We are entering into a new political revolution with regard to the struggle for the total liberation and the unity of the African continent. Perhaps you didn't hear what I said.
In the early hours of the 17th of April 1967, Ghana was shaken by an audacious attempt to overthrow the ruling government. A group of junior officers of the Ghana Armed Forces, led by Lieutenant Samuel Arthur, Lieutenant Moses Yaboa, and Second Lieutenant Osei Poku, launched a coup codenamed Operation Guitar Boy. Their motive was simple, but dangerous. They believed the country had drifted off course under the new rulers, and that bold action by soldiers like them could reset Ghana. Before dawn, Accra was in confusion. Radios crackled, orders clashed, and units moved without clear command. In the middle of it was Major General Emmanuel Kotoka, one of the most powerful figures in the military government. Near the airport area, he was confronted by the rebels. Shots were fired. Within minutes, Kotoka was down, killed in the chaos he was trying to contain. But the story of Kotoka is bigger than his final minutes. Emmanuel Kwasi Kotoka was born on the 26th of September 1926 in the small village of Alakple in the Keta district of the British Gold Coast, today's Volta region of Ghana. He grew up in a humble coastal household, with his father working as a fisherman and his mother as a trader in the coastal community. Kotoka's early life was grounded in faith and discipline. By 1941, he had completed his basic schooling, and like many young men of his time, he initially looked to the church for a career. He trained to become a Catholic teacher catechist and even worked briefly as a teacher. But after only 9 months, he changed paths. In 1942, still in search of his true calling, Kotoka turned to goldsmithing. He applied himself with determination, and by January 1947, he had qualified as a professional goldsmith. However, financial hardship and limited opportunities made it impossible for him to continue in the craft. Abandoning goldsmithing, Kotoka set his sights on a new path, one that would lead him into the military. In July 1947, at the age of 20, Kotoka enlisted as a private in the Gold Coast Regiment of the British Colonial Army. He began his training at the infantry school in Teshi, near Accra, where he was responsible for drilling illiterate recruits, a task he performed diligently. Kotoka's leadership qualities quickly became evident. By 1948, he had risen to the rank of sergeant, and 3 years later, he became a company sergeant major. His superiors identified him as an outstanding soldier, and by November 1954, he was commissioned as a lieutenant. He was then sent to West Germany, where he gained further experience with the British Army of the Rhine. Kotoka returned to the Gold Coast in early 1955 as a newly minted officer, ready to serve in a transitioning nation edging toward independence. He was appointed a platoon commander in the 2nd Gold Coast Regiment, and his ascent through the ranks continued steadily. In September 1961, he achieved the temporary rank of lieutenant colonel and took command of the 2nd Infantry Battalion. Around this time, Ghana, which had achieved independence in 1957, became involved in international peacekeeping under the United Nations. Kotoka played a prominent role in these missions. In mid-1960, as a major, he commanded D Company of Ghana's 2nd Battalion, which was deployed to the Republic of the Congo as part of the United Nations Operation in the Congo. Stationed in the Congolese capital of Leopoldville, now Kinshasa, Kotoka's unit was tasked with guarding the national radio station during a tense period of turmoil in which Congo's Prime Minister, Patrice Lumumba, and President Joseph Kasavubu were locked in a power struggle. In 1962, Kotoka led Ghanaian troops in the breakaway province of Katanga, where secessionist leader Moise Tshombe was attempting to carve out an independent state with the support of foreign mercenaries and mining interests. Kotoka distinguished himself in action at an important military airbase in Kema, and for his valor in the Congo campaign, he was awarded the Ghana Service Order for exceptional bravery in 1963. Despite his relatively young age, Kotoka had become one of the rising stars of the Ghanaian military establishment. However, at the same time, Ghana's internal politics were growing more turbulent, and the military itself was being drawn into the fray. Kotoka would soon find himself at the crossroads of these political upheavals. Ghana in the early 1960s was under the charismatic but increasingly authoritarian leadership of President Kwame Nkrumah. In August 1962, Nkrumah narrowly escaped death in a grenade attack at Kulungugu in northern Ghana, after which he grew ever more distrustful of potential rivals, including elements within his own armed forces. He created an elite, Soviet-trained Presidential Guard regiment, loyal only to him, and began to sideline or remove officers he deemed untrustworthy. As Quartermaster General of the Army in 1962, Kotoka was directly involved in dealing with the logistical and organizational challenges posed by this new Guard regiment. He opposed Nkrumah's decision to elevate the president's own Guard regiment into a full-fledged field unit separate from the regular army, seeing it as a breach of proper military procedure and a step toward turning the army into a politicized tool of the regime. This stance put Kotoka at odds with Nkrumah's inner circle. By 1964, mutters of discontent within the military and police had coalesced into a secret plot against Nkrumah's government. One of the early conspirators was John Willie Kofi Harley, the Inspector General of Police, who confided his intentions to Kotoka that year. Kotoka agreed to cooperate with Harley, sharing the belief that Nkrumah's increasingly autocratic rule and economic mismanagement were steering Ghana in the wrong direction. However, attempts to stage a coup in early 1965 did not materialize. The conspirators struggled to win over Major General Stephen Otu, the Chief of Defense Staff, who remained loyal to Nkrumah. Likewise, other senior officers were wary of treason, so Kotoka and his compatriots realized they might have to rely on more junior officers to carry out any takeover. In July 1965, Kotoka was transferred out of Accra, possibly by Nkrumah's design, to become commander of the Army's 2nd Infantry Brigade, based in Kumasi in the Ashanti region. This move, however, proved fateful in an unexpected way. In Kumasi, Kotoka became close friends with Major Akwasi Afrifa, a bright young officer serving as his brigade major. Afrifa harbored his own grievances against the regime and soon joined Kotoka's growing conspiracy. Together with Harley and a handful of others, they started crafting a plan to topple Nkrumah. By late 1965, they decided to act at the earliest opportune moment. President Nkrumah's foreign policy inadvertently handed the plotters a cover for their clandestine preparations. In late 1965, Nkrumah announced that Ghana would contribute troops to an African force to fight against the white minority government in Rhodesia, today's Zimbabwe. He ordered the military into a state of readiness. Kotoka astutely used this mobilization as a pretext to reposition troops and conduct exercises near Accra, thereby moving forces into place under the guise of training for Rhodesia. All the while, Nkrumah's security apparatus remained unaware that these maneuvers were part of a coup plan. Timing was critical. The conspirators agreed they would act when Nkrumah was outside the country, to minimize resistance and avoid unnecessary bloodshed. In February 1966, an opportunity arose. Nkrumah departed on a high-profile trip to Asia, with stops in Beijing and Hanoi on a peace mission related to the Vietnam War. The plotters set the coup for dawn on February 24, 1966, just days after Nkrumah's departure. Kotoka also understood that success hinged on neutralizing the military commanders in Accra, who were not yet in the know. he managed to secretly convince Colonel A.K. Akron, the commanding officer of the 1st Brigade in Accra, to join the conspiracy at the 11th hour. Furthermore, they roped in a respected retired army officer, Major General Joseph Arthur Ankra, as a figurehead to lead the new government once Nkrumah was ousted. Ankra, who had been involuntarily retired by Nkrumah months earlier, was seen as a popular and stabilizing choice to front the regime, since Kotoka and Harley preferred to wield power from behind the scenes rather than serve as head of state. At approximately 6 a.m. on 24th February 1966, Kotoka and his co-conspirators struck, executing what they had codenamed Operation Cold Chop. Major Afrifa led a contingent of soldiers to seize key installations in the capital, including the broadcasting house of the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation. Once the radio station was secured, Kotoka made a dawn broadcast to the nation announcing that the military and police had taken over the government in order to save the country from economic chaos and one-party tyranny. This radio address was the first that most Ghanaians heard of the coup, and it signaled that the long-feared and long-rumored takeover was a reality. Around the same time, loyalist resistance was being quelled. At Flagstaff House, Nkrumah's official residence and the seat of government, fighting broke out between the coup makers and the president's own guard regiment, who initially resisted the insurgents. A brief gun battle ensued, resulting in a few casualties on both sides. However, with Nkrumah himself absent abroad and many of his loyalists surprised and disorganized, the standoff did not last long. By midday, the Guard Regiment laid down their arms and surrendered, effectively sealing the success of the coup in Accra. Meanwhile, Nkrumah, who was still in Asia at the time, was left a president in exile, cut off from home and effectively ousted without a chance to marshal any response. Although he had led Ghana to independence and was revered by many across Africa, when news broke that his government had been overthrown, crowds in Accra and other cities erupted in celebration. In the aftermath, an 8-man junta of military and police officers called the National Liberation Council was formed to govern Ghana. The council was headed formally by General Ankra as chairman, but true power was shared among the key architects of the coup. Kotoka, who was immediately promoted from lieutenant colonel to major general on the day of the coup, took a seat on the NLC as the member in charge of the Ghana Armed Forces. He was appointed general officer commanding the army, effectively putting him in charge of the entire Ghanaian military. For a time, he also served concurrently as Minister for Health in the new regime. Other NLC members included Police Inspector J.W.K. Harley, who became Minister for Foreign Affairs and Deputy Chairman of the NLC, Brigadier Akwazi Afrifa, Colonel A.K. Akron, and 2 other senior police commissioners and army officers, balancing the council between 4 soldiers and 4 police officials. Notably, evidence later emerged that external powers had some awareness of the brewing plot against Nkrumah. Declassified U.S. intelligence documents indicate that the CIA and other Western agencies had been informed about the conspiracy at least a year in advance. A memorandum from the U.S. National Security Council in 1965 noted,
"The plotters are keeping us briefed. While we're not directly involved, I'm told, we and other Western countries have been helping to set up the situation by ignoring Nkrumah's pleas for economic aid. All in all, it looks good."
This and other evidence suggest that while the coup was locally led, it was tacitly welcomed by Western governments, uncomfortable with Nkrumah's socialist and Pan-African orientation. Indeed, Ghana's new NLC government quickly aligned itself with the West, implementing economic austerity measures and liberalization policies recommended by the International Monetary Fund and World Bank. As a member of the ruling National Liberation Council, General Kotoka wielded significant influence in the governance of Ghana. Within the NLC's collective leadership, he was regarded as representing the interests of the military, especially the younger officers who had supported the coup. He took his new responsibilities seriously and was outspoken about the reforms he felt Ghana needed. Kotoka advocated for the eradication of corruption and the overhaul of the state administration, seeing these as necessary to reverse the failures of Nkrumah's regime. He was particularly adamant that the politicians of the ousted Convention People's Party, Nkrumah's party, should be barred from ever returning to power. In Kotoka's view, CPP officials had abused power and mismanaged the country, so the NLC promptly passed decrees to disqualify leading CPP figures from holding public office, and even detained many without trial.
How is the reconstruction of the country going since the overthrow of the Nkrumah regime?
I think very well indeed. It's going very well. Everybody is working hard, and we hope it won't be long when things will be on good footing.
Returning to ex-President Nkrumah, do you think he'll ever try to return to Ghana?
We'll be very pleased indeed to have him back in Ghana, and we'll give him the red carpet.
Thank you, sir.
Despite the NLC's outward confidence, the new regime remained on edge. Nkrumah, from his exile in Guinea, denounced the military junta and vowed to return to power. Through 1966 and into early 1967, there were rumors and reports that die-hard Nkrumaists were plotting revenge. Some of Kotoka's colleagues urged him to take these threats seriously, but the general was somewhat dismissive of warnings that a counter-coup was in the making, believing that the NLC had sufficient support and that any mutiny could be easily crushed. This confidence would prove to be tragically misplaced. In the early hours of the 17th of April 1967, Ghana was shaken by an audacious attempt to overthrow the National Liberation Council. This plot, which the conspirators chillingly codenamed Operation Guitar Boy, was led primarily by junior officers of the Ghana Armed Forces. Lieutenant Samuel Arthur, Lieutenant Moses Yeboah, and Second Lieutenant Osei Poku emerged as the central ringleaders of the conspiracy. Arthur and Yeboah were junior officers in their 20s, and Osei Poku was so new to the army that he had graduated from the military academy only 5 months earlier. The plotters managed to secretly recruit about 119 soldiers from the 2nd Reconnaissance Squadron based in Ho, in the Volta region. This unit was equipped with weapons and armored cars. They also gained the tacit support of a few senior non-commissioned officers, notably Warrant Officer George Ofosu, who helped encourage troops to follow the lieutenant's lead. It was a daring gambit by men of relatively low rank, exploiting the element of surprise and discontent among some troops who felt left out of the post-coup spoils. The codename Guitar Boy had an interesting origin. It was taken from a popular West African highlife song by Nigerian musician Victor Uwaifo, in which a mythical mermaid gives a guitarist a magic guitar and urges him to play beautifully. The song had been a hit in Ghana, and the young officers fancied the name for their coup plot, perhaps believing their own escapade would become legend. In a grim footnote, the NLC regime would later ban Uwaifo's tune from the airwaves after the coup attempt, considering it subversive. The motivations behind the coup were a blend of political and personal ambitions. It is true that many within the rank-and-file Army and Air Force had been uneasy with the coup against Nkrumah and yearned to avenge his overthrow. However, Lieutenant Arthur's own statements suggest a more ego-driven motive. According to later testimony, Arthur bragged that he wanted to be the first lieutenant to have staged a successful military coup in Africa. Planning for Operation Guitar Boy took place in utmost secrecy over weeks, if not months. The conspirators knew they lacked the open support of high-ranking officers, so they concocted a bold deception. They led the soldiers under their command to believe that a broad, countrywide military uprising was underway, involving many units, not just their own. On the night of Sunday, April 16, 1967, under the pretext of a special training exercise near Ghana's border with Togo, Arthur secretly assembled over 100 soldiers from the Ho-based Recce Squadron. These men were made to understand that come morning, all the Ghana Armed Forces would rise to oust the NLC, and that their unit was simply spearheading a well-coordinated military-wide coup. By dawn, Arthur laid a ruthless blueprint for the regime change and called for the elimination of the entire NLC leadership and all senior officers of the armed forces. He then split his rebel force into 4 assault teams, each assigned to capture a vital location in Accra. One squad was tasked with seizing Ghana's international airport. Another was to take control of the Flagstaff House, the military headquarters. A third team targeted the Ghana Broadcasting House, and the fourth was directed at Christiansborg Castle, the seat of the government. Leading by example, Lieutenant Arthur personally led the detachment that stormed the national radio station. In the early confusion of that morning, Arthur's men overcame the small security detail at the broadcaster. Eager to declare victory, the lieutenant rushed to the microphone and announced over the radio that the NLC government had been successfully overthrown. This premature proclamation proved to be a critical mistake, as it alerted loyalist forces and the public that a coup was underway, while the outcome was still far from decided. Arthur's broadcast claimed that a revolutionary new regime was in control, but even as he spoke, fierce skirmishes were raging at the other target sites. At Christiansborg Castle, 2nd Lieutenant Osei Poku led a raiding party in an attempt to capture General Nkrumah and other council members. The attackers infiltrated the castle grounds amid sporadic gunfire. However, Nkrumah narrowly escaped their clutches by slipping out, reportedly climbing over a wall or through a side exit, and went into hiding as loyal troops converged to defend the castle. The rebels thus failed to nab the head of state, depriving them of a major bargaining chip. Meanwhile, some of the heaviest action unfolded around Flagstaff House and the nearby military installations, where General Kotoka was located that morning. There, Lieutenant Yabowa's squad attacked and broke through the defenses of the Army headquarters, with the intention of eliminating Kotoka and any senior officers present. A firefight erupted in the compound and nearby areas. Amid the chaos, Kotoka's personal bodyguard, Staff Sergeant Emmanuel Ose Grunshi, fought desperately to protect his commander. But he was fatally shot in the scuffle, as were a few loyal soldiers trying to repel the attackers. General Kotoka found himself cornered. Accounts suggest that he tried to flee towards the airfield, which is adjacent to the military headquarters, once it became clear that his position was overrun. In the end, Kotoka was captured by Yabowa's men near Accra Airport. In an act of brutality, Yabowa personally murdered the unarmed Kotoka, later confessing at his court-martial that he first stabbed the general with a bayonet and then shot him repeatedly. By the time Kotoka's body was recovered, he had 10 bullet wounds and multiple stab injuries, a clear sign of overkill, driven by either rage or a desire to ensure the feared general was truly dead. It was approximately 7 a.m. when Emmanuel Kotoka, age 40, fell at the forecourt of Accra's airport in a pool of blood, becoming the only member of the NLC to be killed in the coup attempt. At the airport itself, fighting also took place. Rebel soldiers seized portions of the airport grounds, but they failed to secure complete control. One critical mishap for the plotters occurred when Lieutenant Arthur went to the armory of the 1st Reconnaissance Regiment to gather more weapons. The quartermaster on duty, Captain C.Y. Avevor, realized Arthur was part of an illegal uprising and refused to hand over the keys to the ammunition depot. Arthur did not hesitate. He shot Captain Avevor dead on the spot. This gunshot may have been one of the first clear signs to other officers that a rogue operation was in progress, and it cost the rebels a chance to rearm fully. Despite their initial gains, the coup plotters' window of success was extremely short-lived. By late morning on April 17th, loyal military units from other garrisons and police forces had mobilized to confront the mutineers. Crucially, many soldiers in Accra, upon hearing the radio announcement and gunfire, realized this was not a universally supported coup, but a rogue element. Units from Kema and other nearby camps moved in to restore order. Intense firefights broke out around the radio station and Flagstaff House as loyalist troops encircled the rebels. With General Nkrumah surviving and now coordinating a response, Alongside Police Chief Harley and others, the Loyalists had a clear command structure. By the end of the day, Operation Guitar Boy had collapsed, and all 3 coup leaders were taken into custody, alongside several soldiers. The immediate aftermath of the failed coup was marked by a mix of relief, grief, and punitive retribution. Ghana was stunned by the loss of General Kotoka, the man who had been instrumental in the 1966 coup and had become a symbol of the new order. Kotoka's funeral, held with full military honors, drew men and women from all walks of life who came to pay their respects. In the years following his death, Kotoka was officially honored as a national hero by the military government that he helped install. The most visible tribute came in 1969, when Ghana's largest airport, previously called Accra International Airport, was renamed Kotoka International Airport in his memory. A life-size bronze statue of Kotoka, clad in a military uniform, was erected at the spot in the airport's forecourt where he fell in battle during the 1967 coup attempt. On the other side of the ledger, swift and harsh justice was meted out to the coup plotters. During the televised court-martial in late April 1967, presided over by Air Vice Marshal Michael Otu, the gruesome details of the plot were laid bare. Evidence presented included the Operation Guitar Boy master plan document and eyewitness testimonies of the killings. Lieutenant Yeboah was unflinching in admitting his role as Kotoka's killer, reportedly boasting of how he had shot the general. Lieutenant Sam Arthur likewise was identified as having personally shot Captain Avavor for refusing to cooperate. Second Lieutenant Osei Poku, as the youngest and least experienced, seemed to play a somewhat lesser role, but he had still led armed men in attacking the seat of government. The verdict was never in doubt. In May 1967, the tribunal found the officers guilty of treason and murder. Lieutenant Arthur and Lieutenant Yeboah were sentenced to death. Not long after, they were publicly executed by firing squad at a military range in Teshi, Accra. Second Lieutenant Osei Poku was spared the death penalty due to his youth, but received a 30-year prison sentence. He would remain incarcerated for many years, eventually released in the late 1970s after a change of government. Warrant Officer George Ofosu and other enlisted men implicated in the plot were also tried. Some were imprisoned, and a few may have been dismissed from service, though the exact punishments for all subordinate participants were not widely publicized. The National Liberation Council reacted to the coup attempt by tightening security and cracking down on perceived dissidents. In the immediate wake of Kotoka's assassination, there were wholesale arrests of Nkrumah supporters and known CPP activists across the country. Though the investigation did not uncover evidence of direct involvement by the exiled Nkrumah, the junta used the opportunity to purge elements of society deemed sympathetic to the former president. In the longer term, Kotoka's death had profound effects on the NLC regime itself. His absence upset the balance of power within the NLC. Some historians argue that Kotoka had been a stabilizing influence, and once he was gone, the remaining leaders jostled more openly for importance, weakening their collective grip on power. General Ankra, the NLC chairman, would later face a credibility crisis and resign in 1969 amid a bribery scandal, and Brigadier Afrifa took over to steer the country to a planned return to civilian rule. Indeed, by late 1968, the junta had committed to hand over governance, and elections were held in August 1969, a timeline that some attribute partly to the shock and introspection that followed the Guitar Boy affair. In this sense, although the coup failed in its immediate aim, it indirectly contributed to the end of military rule by the NLC, as the surviving leaders sought to exit on their own terms before any further unrest could unseat them. In the early hours of January 13, 1972, the people of Ghana awoke to an unexpected radio broadcast. A firm voice came on air and announced the sudden overthrow of the civilian government. The voice was that of Colonel Ignatius Kutu Acheampong, commander of the 1st Infantry Brigade of the Ghanaian Army. In a tone both resolute and charged with drama, Acheampong declared,
I would like to emphasize immediately that this coup was not initiated by the armed forces merely to satisfy our selfish ends. As I said in my earlier broadcasts, the takeover was occasioned principally by the hypocrisy of the Busia regime, coupled with the inefficient management by that regime of our economy.
With those words, Ghana's Second Republic was brought to an abrupt end. Colonel Acheampong, an unlikely coup maker in the eyes of many, had seized power without a single shot being fired. This coup swept away Prime Minister Abrefa Busia's elected government only 2.5 years after it had begun. What followed was a dramatic journey, the rise of a soldier statesman who promised to redeem Ghana from economic despair, and the eventual fall of his regime amid corruption, public discontent, and his own tragic demise by firing squad. Ignatius Kutu Acheampong was born on September 23, 1931, in the town of Trabuom in the Ashanti region of the Gold Coast, colonial Ghana. He was raised in a devout Roman Catholic family. A capable student, he obtained a middle school certificate and later a diploma in commerce after studying at the Central College of Commerce in Agona, Swedru. As a young man, Acheampong worked briefly as a stenographer in a timber firm and then as a teacher, rising to the position of vice principal of the Kumasi Commercial College, before finally turning to the military, where he found his true calling. In 1951, during the final years of British colonial rule, he enlisted as a private in the Gold Coast Regiment, part of the British West African Frontier Force. Later, he underwent officer training at Aldershot in England and earned his commission as a second lieutenant in the newly independent Ghanaian Army in 1959. Acheampong's early military career was marked by steady advancement. He participated in United Nations peacekeeping operations during the Congo crisis in the early 1960s, gaining valuable experience abroad. Back in Ghana, the ground was shaking politically. In 1966, a joint military-police coup overthrew President Kwame Nkrumah, and a new junta, the National Liberation Council, stepped in to run the country. Acheampong, by then a lieutenant colonel, was appointed Western Regional Commissioner under the NLC regime, giving him a first taste of governance as the administrative head of one of Ghana's regions. This role brought him into contact with senior coup makers such as Lieutenant General Akwasi Afrifa and other civilian politicians of the day. By 1969, when the NLC handed power to an elected civilian government, kickstarting the Second Republic, Acheampong had risen to command the 1st Infantry Brigade, one of the most strategic units of the army. Notably, he was among the few high-ranking officers of Akan origin in an army whose leadership had historically been ethnically mixed. This fact would later feed rumors about his political loyalties. In October 1969, Dr. Kofi Abrefa Busia became Prime Minister in the new civilian government. Busia was also an ethnic Akan and led the Progress Party. It was whispered in political circles that Colonel Acheampong, as a prominent Akan officer, had the confidence of Busia's government. Indeed, rumors had it that Acheampong, upon the recommendation of former head of state General Afrifa, became not only a close pal to Prime Minister Busia, but also to his ruling Progress Party. He was seen as an influential officer who would safeguard an Akan-led administration against any unrest. But behind this show of loyalty, Ghana's problems were piling up, and Acheampong's ambitions were quietly swelling with them. By 1971, Ghana's economy was in dire straits. Busia's government, though democratically elected, had become deeply unpopular due to a series of contentious policies and economic hardships. The global economic downturn at the time had hit Ghana's main exports, and Busia's attempts at austerity only fueled discontent. In what became a flashpoint, Busia's government imposed a drastic 44% devaluation of the Ghanaian cedi in December 1971, aiming to stabilize the balance of payments. The prices of imported goods immediately skyrocketed, and ordinary Ghanaians struggled as inflation hit them hard. The situation grew so desperate that by New Year's Eve of 1971, Busia himself warned that 1972 would be especially difficult due to the economic crisis. But economic woes were not the only issue. Busia's regime had alienated many through certain political decisions. He had enforced an infamous mass layoff of civil servants known as Apollo 568, which bred resentment in the bureaucracy. He also implemented an aliens compliance order in 1969 that expelled tens of thousands of Nigerian and other West African migrants from Ghana, causing social and economic disruptions. Furthermore, Busia's overture to establish dialogue with apartheid South Africa against the stance of the rest of Africa tarnished Ghana's image and angered Pan-Africanists. By late 1971, rumors of a military coup were rife in Accra. Busia, attempting to project confidence, publicly dismissed the prospect of a coup at a rally in mid-1971. Yet inside the barracks and marketplaces, frustration with the government was boiling over. The tipping point came with the late 1971 economic measures. The opposition lambasted Busia's devaluation as
a policy of panic and despair.
When Busia left Ghana for medical treatment in Britain in early January 1972, the moment of opportunity presented itself. Colonel Acheampong and a group of fellow officers decided to strike. On January 13, 1972, just 2 weeks into the new year, Acheampong and a band of officers struck fast, launching a swift pre-dawn coup that caught the country off guard. Busia's government was toppled almost without resistance. President Edward Akufo-Addo, the ceremonial president, was also removed. The speed and ease of the takeover indeed surprised many observers, not least because Acheampong had been perceived as a friend of the regime. But the colonel justified his actions as a patriotic duty. He cited economic mismanagement, rising inflation, and public dissatisfaction under Busia as the reasons for the military's intervention. Ghana, in his view, had to be saved from complete collapse. The new junta that took charge in Ghana styled itself as the National Redemption Council, the NRC.
Beloved Ghana, born with a deep sense of pride, nurtured with unshakable courage, has said goodbye forever to reaction, to timidity and hypocrisy in government, and to the suppression of the interests and welfare of the people. Together we shall make Ghana great. Long live the revolution. Long live Ghana. May God bless us all. Thank you.
A burst of energy and optimism marked Acheampong's early days in power. He projected himself as a man on a mission to rescue Ghana's economy and restore pride to the nation. In public speeches, he often invoked nationalism and self-reliance, echoing themes of Ghana's first president, Kwame Nkrumah. In fact, Acheampong was widely seen as having Nkrumahist sympathies. He assured Ghanaians that the change of government was nothing short of a revolution, aimed at transforming the country. Such rhetoric struck a chord with a populace yearning for strong leadership and solutions. True to his word, Acheampong wasted no time in implementing populist economic measures. In February 1972, less than a month after seizing power, he dramatically reversed Busia's currency devaluation, going against the prescription of the International Monetary Fund and making imports briefly cheaper in the country. From that point on, the new government imposed strict price controls on goods and launched crackdowns on hoarding, determined to combat inflation and profiteering. At the same time, Acheampong attempted to heal some of Ghana's old political wounds. Notably, just a few months after he took over, former President Kwame Nkrumah died in exile in April 1972. Acheampong's government allowed Nkrumah's body to be brought back to Ghana for a hero's burial in his hometown of Nkroful. This was a significant gesture, since Nkrumah had been living in exile after the 1966 coup, and many thought he would never rest on Ghanaian soil again. To many Ghanaians, this showed a spirit of reconciliation, in contrast to the previous military regime, which had vilified Nkrumah. Under Acheampong's watch, nationalism and self-reliance became the ethos of the day. Perhaps the most celebrated initiative of his regime was Operation Feed Yourself. Launched in 1972, this was a massive drive aimed at achieving food self-sufficiency in agriculture. Ghana, once a food exporter, had come to import large quantities of staple foods by the late 1960s, a trend Acheampong was determined to reverse. He and his Commissioner for Agriculture, Colonel Frank Bernasco, urged every Ghanaian to go back to the farm. Even urban dwellers were encouraged to tend garden plots. Under Operation Feed Yourself, state resources and propaganda were devoted to boosting domestic production of rice, maize, cassava, and vegetables. According to many accounts, the program achieved some success. Food production did increase, and Ghana became largely self-sufficient in maize and yams by the mid-1970s. The sight of Acheampong himself visiting rural farms, often in military fatigues but handing out farming tools, became a symbol of this campaign. Another headline policy was Operation Keep Right, implemented on August 4, 1974. In a single day, Ghana switched its traffic system from driving on the left, a legacy of British rule, to driving on the right-hand side of the road. This was part of Acheampong's broader effort to reorient Ghana after its colonial past and align with neighboring francophone countries that already drove on the right. The NRC regime also undertook numerous development projects. There was a national reconstruction program focusing on job creation and skills training. Urban infrastructure got attention. Streetlights in cities were repaired, and major sports stadiums were renovated to meet international standards. Large housing projects were started, the most famous being the Dansoman estate in Accra, which was then West Africa's largest planned housing development. Acheampong also initiated the Kopong Hydroelectric Project, a second dam on the Volta River designed to supplement the Akosombo Dam and boost electricity generation. By the mid-1970s, Ghana under Acheampong was experiencing, on the surface, a wave of national pride and relative stability. One commentator later reflected that,
"Never in the history of this country was a whole nation united under any government as was seen in the period from January 1972 to July 1978.
That might be an exaggeration born out of nostalgia. Still, it is true that in his initial years, General Acheampong enjoyed broad popularity. Indeed, by 1975, the regime felt secure enough to reshape itself. The junta transformed from the NRC into the Supreme Military Council, the SMC, essentially a military government with Acheampong at its helm as chairman. He surrounded himself with top military officers of diverse backgrounds. His second-in-command was General Fred Akufo and Acheampong, and other SMC members included Generals Robert Kote, Aga, Major General E.K. Utuka, and Ewe, Yao Boache, and Ashanti, and others. This ethnic mix in the junta was deliberate. By balancing the tribal composition of his government, he projected national unity and maintained the loyalty of the military rank and file. For a while, Acheampong's rule brought real improvements to Ghana. But even in those good days, small cracks were beginning to form. The 1973 oil crisis, combined with a sharp decline in cocoa prices, Ghana's main export, had a severe impact on the economy. Furthermore, the initial boost from revaluing the currency proved unsustainable. In fact, maintaining an artificially high Ghanaian cedi led to new distortions. Imported goods grew scarce because importers couldn't get enough foreign exchange at the official rate. By the mid-1970s, basic commodities such as rice, sugar, milk, and soap began to disappear from store shelves. Queues for basic goods became a common sight in towns and cities. The government responded by doubling down on price controls and anti-hoarding measures, but these interventions backfired. A vast black market economy, known colloquially as kalabule, took root. In markets like Makola in Accra and Asafo in Kumasi, hoarders would stash goods and only sell at several times the controlled price to those desperate enough to pay. As a result, an entire class of army officers, bureaucrats, and businessmen reportedly enriched themselves through smuggling and kickbacks. Before long, corruption had begun to penetrate the highest levels of the government. Ironically, a regime that came to cleanse hypocrisy was now mired in its own hypocrisy. Many top officials and military men were living well beyond their salaries, acquiring plush mansions and fleets of cars. Driven by this economic desperation, Acheampong adopted a bold and controversial foreign policy, known as the Yentua policy. The word Yentua, meaning "we won't pay" in Akan, was a blunt message to Ghana's foreign creditors. Ghana was done repaying its debts. You see, by the mid-1970s, Ghana was drowning in foreign debt, and Acheampong insisted the country needed breathing space. So, he simply refused to pay interest on certain loans and defaulted on others, especially those he deemed odious or had been accumulated by previous regimes. To many neighboring African countries, this bold move felt like a proud rebellion. Ghana was finally standing up to powerful neo-colonial lenders such as the IMF and the World Bank. However, the backlash was severe. International creditors and donors turned their backs on Ghana, cutting off vital aid and credit. Suddenly, the country was unable to import enough basic goods because suppliers abroad refused to sell on credit. Fuel shortages deepened. At one point, even fishing trawlers were stuck at port for lack of fuel and spare parts, and fish, a staple of the Ghanaian diet, became scarce. By 1977, life for the average Ghanaian had become exceedingly difficult. University students, who had initially been enamored of Acheampong's nationalist rhetoric, grew restive as campuses ran out of supplies and graduate job prospects faded. Sensing the mood turning against him, Acheampong resorted to the classic playbook of African strongmen: censorship and repression. Critical newspapers were silenced, and outspoken voices, journalists, lawyers, and old opposition figures from the Busia era were arrested or kept under close surveillance. Yet, for all his flaws, Acheampong's rule was not drenched in blood. Compared to some of the brutal juntas elsewhere in West Africa at the time, his regime was, in relative terms, less violent and less openly savage. For instance, there were multiple attempted coups against him, including one led by a businessman by the name of Alex Hama in 1973. While those plotters were initially condemned to death, Acheampong later pardoned them after short prison terms. No executions of coup plotters or political prisoners took place under his tenure, a fact supporters cite to this day. This comparative leniency would stand in stark contrast to what followed his regime. However, the absence of brutal repression did not save Acheampong's regime from public anger. By 1977, open dissent was on the rise. Professional groups, like the Bar Association, student unions, and even some within the military, were grumbling that the revolution had been derailed by corruption and mismanagement. Under mounting pressure for a return to civilian rule, Acheampong in late 1976 floated the idea of a union government, or Unigov for short, a power-sharing arrangement between the military and civilians with no political parties. He argued that Ghana's partisan politics had been divisive and that a new system was needed where competent civilians could join soldiers in governing without the rivalry of party politics. Unfortunately, many Ghanaians saw this as a thinly veiled plan for Acheampong and the military to retain power indefinitely under a civilian facade.
Undeterred, Acheampong set in motion a process to legitimize his idea. A national referendum on the union government was scheduled for March 30th, 1978, so that Ghanaians could vote yes or no to the concept of a military-civilian hybrid regime. The lead-up to this referendum further polarized the country. University students and lecturers spearheaded the No campaign, insisting that the military had no business staying in politics. They demanded a full return to multi-party democracy. On the other side, the government mobilized resources for a Yes campaign, saturating state media with pro-Unigov messages. The atmosphere grew tense. At one point, protests and clashes erupted between pro- and anti-Unigov demonstrators, and at least 4 people were killed in the city of Kumasi. When the day of the referendum came, the official results, announced by the Electoral Commissioner, Mr. Justice Isaac Aban, claimed a narrow victory for Acheampong's yes side, around 60% in favor and 40% against. But this outcome was immediately met with accusations of fraud. Many educated Ghanaians simply did not believe that the majority had truly voted for continued military rule. The situation turned almost ludicrous as the Chief Electoral Commissioner himself, Justice Aban, went into hiding, apparently fearing that the military rulers might force him to tamper further with the results. His disappearance only fueled suspicions that the vote count had been manipulated under duress. In the end, this exercise, instead of legitimizing Acheampong, became the final trigger for his downfall. As one Ghanaian observer later put it succinctly,
Acheampong's drive to make himself president for life through the union government was his undoing. Once the people say no, and you want to turn it to yes, you are bound to fall.
Following this, many senior officers, including some members of the Supreme Military Council, felt Acheampong had led them into a political disaster. Behind the scenes, a plan was hatched by Acheampong's second-in-command, Lieutenant General Fred Akufo, and a small circle of officers to remove the head of state from power. In the early hours of July 5, 1978, while most of Ghana slept, they moved. No troops marched in the streets, and no gunshots were heard. It was an internal coup within the ruling council. Senior officers confronted General Acheampong and essentially forced him to resign as head of state. Acheampong, perhaps sensing that he had lost all support, offered no resistance. The next morning, radio announcements informed Ghanaians that General Fred W.K. Akufo had replaced Acheampong as the new chairman of the Supreme Military Council, and Acheampong was placed under house arrest. Ghanaians greeted the news with mixed feelings. While Acheampong had been popular in his early years, the hardships of the late 1970s had turned much of the populace against him. Still, many did not rejoice excessively. You see, Acheampong was an Ashanti, and there was a palpable sadness in parts of the Ashanti region at the fall of their son. General Akufo's new military government tried to distance itself from Acheampong's mistakes. It lifted some of the more burdensome economic restrictions and promised to return Ghana to civilian rule by mid-1979. For a brief moment, it seemed Acheampong's story might end with him simply living quietly in exile within Ghana. But fate had a darker conclusion in store. Less than a year after Acheampong's overthrow, events in Ghana took another dramatic turn, this time led by a fiery young Air Force officer by the name of Flight Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings. On June 4, 1979, junior officers and enlisted men, inspired by Rawlings, launched a mutiny that spiraled into a full-blown coup. They overthrew General Akufo's government, which had itself been in power for only 11 months. Suddenly, Ghana was in the hands of the Armed Forces Revolutionary Council, the AFRC, with Flight Lieutenant Rawlings as its public leader. These revolutionaries had a very stark agenda. In their eyes, former leaders like Acheampong were chiefly responsible for Ghana's woes due to years of corruption and abuse of office. As a result, Rawlings and his cohorts swiftly arrested many senior military figures of the previous regimes. Acheampong, now 47 years old, was seized at his village house. Though stripped of power, he could not escape the tide of retribution sweeping through the country. He was transported back to Accra to face justice at the hands of the very institution he once commanded. What followed was a summary court-martial of Acheampong and several of his fellow deposed generals. The AFRC set up special military tribunals to try the ex-rulers for corruption, misuse of power, and violation of the public trust. Acheampong was accused of using his position to amass wealth while in office and recklessly dissipating state funds to the detriment of the country. The tribunal found him guilty of corruption and sentenced him to death. Before dawn on June 16, 1979, Ignatius Acheampong was taken from his cell along with another condemned officer, Major General E.K. Utuka, the former border guard commander. Under tight guard, they were driven to a military firing range at Teshi, near the coast, about 4 miles from central Accra. This was the same field where Ghana had carried out executions of coup plotters in the past. The last such execution had been in 1967 after an earlier coup attempt. Facing his final moments, General Acheampong displayed a demeanor that observers found striking. As he was led out to the execution ground, Acheampong smiled and waved a white handkerchief toward the small cluster of reporters present. It was a surreal gesture, whether of courage, defiance, or a kind of resignation, none can say for sure. He was then bound to the stake. Along with Utuka, he had a red hood placed over his head as the firing squad, composed of young soldiers, aimed. In the first light of that morning, volleys of gunfire rang out, and the former head of state fell. Acheampong's death sent shockwaves across Ghana. He was not the only one to face the firing squad. In the June to July 1979 purge, 8 senior military officers were executed, among them 2 other former heads of state, General Fred Akufo and Lieutenant General Akwasi Afrifa. These events remain among the most dramatic and controversial in Ghana's history. Flight Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings and the AFRC ruled for only a few months in 1979, just long enough to purge the military hierarchy and oversee new elections. True to their word, the AFRC handed over power to an elected civilian president by the name of Harrell-Bond in September 1979. But Ghana's respite from military rule was short-lived. Rawlings, dissatisfied with the civilian government's performance, would strike again on December 31, 1981, overthrowing President Lehman and installing himself as leader. That second coming of Rawlings began a nearly two-decade era of revolutionary government and later guided the transition to democracy. At dawn on the 15th of May, 1979, a young Air Force pilot by the name of Jerry John Rawlings stormed Ghana's military barracks with a pistol and a handful of loyal men. His mission? Overthrow the corrupt regime bleeding the country dry. It failed. He was captured, dragged before a military tribunal, and sentenced to death. But instead of begging for mercy, Rawlings stunned the court and the nation. He took full responsibility for the coup, demanded his fellow soldiers be spared, and delivered a fiery speech that echoed through every market, barracks, and radio set in Ghana. 3 weeks later, on June 4, 1979, junior soldiers who'd heard that speech broke him out of jail. By sunrise, Rawlings was on national radio. By sunset, he was head of state. But who was this fearless young man? Where did he come from? And what shaped his obsession with justice? Jerry John Rawlings was born in Accra on June 22, 1947, to an Ewe mother from Ghana's Volta region and a Scottish father. His father, a chemist from Castle Douglas in Scotland, did not stay with the family and returned to the UK when Rawlings was a boy. Raised by his mother, young Rawlings attended the prestigious Acheampong School in Accra, an elite institution that educated many of West Africa's future leaders. In 1968, he enrolled in the Ghana Air Force, pursuing his childhood dream of becoming a pilot. Rawlings proved to be a natural aviator. Upon graduating from flight training in 1969, he won the coveted Speed Bird Trophy as the best cadet, noted for his exceptional skill in aerobatics. He was commissioned as a pilot officer and steadily rose through the ranks, reaching the rank of flight lieutenant by 1978. As a young officer, Rawlings developed a reputation for passion and integrity. He grew increasingly disillusioned with the corruption and privilege he observed among Ghana's ruling elites amid nationwide hardship at the time. You see, in the 1970s, Ghana was under the grip of a military dictatorship. It began with the National Redemption Council, a junta that later rebranded itself as the Supreme Military Council, the SMC. At the helm was Colonel Ignatius Kutu Acheampong, who had seized power in a 1972 coup. He ruled Ghana for about 6 years until he was overthrown by his own army commander, General Fred Akufo, in 1978. Promising to restore discipline and confidence in government, Akufo initially clung to Acheampong's unpopular idea of a union government without political parties, which further eroded public trust. Meanwhile, living conditions for ordinary Ghanaians continued to deteriorate. Inflation spiraled to unheard-of levels by 1979. Food prices were 13 times higher than in the mid-1960s, with annual inflation estimated at around 500%. Basic commodities disappeared from store shelves, and Ghanaians could now find them only through hoarding or a thriving black market, known locally as kalabule. Soon, the hardship sent fury on the streets. In the last 4 months of late 1978, around 80 strikes erupted across all sectors to protest the regime's policies. As a result, Akufo felt compelled to declare a state of emergency in November and even fired over 1,000 striking civil servants in an attempt to quell the unrest. Subsequently, the SMC finally agreed to lift the ban on party politics in January 1979 and schedule new democratic elections meant to return the country to civilian rule by mid-1979. But for many Ghanaians, civilians and soldiers alike, these promises of reform were too little, too late, and something had to give.
People were hungry. Most officers could not see it, but I saw there was anger in the men's eyes.
It was in this climate that Flight Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings, now aged 32, emerged as an unlikely champion of the people. Fortunately for him, he wasn't alone in his frustration. A coterie of junior Ghanaian officers and intellectuals held secret meetings to discuss how to cure the country's ills. Rawlings, himself, became heavily involved in the Free Africa movement, a clandestine group of Pan-Africanist military officers, organized in part by Army Major Kojo Boakye John, that envisioned a series of coups to sweep away corrupt regimes and ultimately unify Africa. In late-night sessions, members read the works of revolutionary thinkers such as Marx, Mao, and Frantz Fanon, debating the legacies of colonialism and the potential for radical change. Initially, the FAM pursued a more stoic approach, whereby young officers would rise through the ranks and attempt a coordinated revolution years later when they held senior positions. But as Ghana's crisis worsened in 1979, Rawlings grew impatient.
All Boakye John did was talk. He was never going to act.
On the morning of Tuesday, May 15, 1979, Rawlings decided to make his move. Together with a small band of trusted soldiers, Rawlings set out to instigate an uprising within the military. In the early hours, he and his conspirators armed themselves at Accra's Air Force Base. They commandeered several armored vehicles and weapons from the base armory, swiftly overpowering the base guards and taking control of key points. Under Rawlings's lead, the rebel soldiers seized the base communication center and began arresting senior military officers who were caught off guard at that hour. Rawlings hoped this lightning action would ignite a broader revolt. According to later accounts, he had alerted a close confidant, Lieutenant Kojo Boakye John, of his intentions a few days prior, in an effort to secure wider support. Boakye John, feeling the timing was premature, refused to join him on the night of the coup. Unperturbed, Rawlings pushed ahead. He drove to the Army's 5th Battalion barracks in Accra, where Boakye John was posted, in a bid to force his hand in the final moments and bring him into the uprising. Fatefully, Boakye John was not present at the barracks when he arrived. Frustrated and running out of time, Rawlings reportedly slammed his G3 rifle to the ground in anger. Unfortunately, the loaded rifle discharged upon impact, sending bursts of gunfire cracking through the barracks. The sudden shots shattered any hope of maintaining secrecy. Soldiers awoke in alarm, confusion spread, and the element of surprise was lost. At the same time, Rawlings's ragtag coup team was facing other setbacks. They had seized a small Ferret Scout armored car as part of their plan to secure strategic locations. But the driver of the Ferret had not even been briefed on the true mission. Sensing the chaos after the accidental gunshots, the driver realized something was amiss and deliberately steered the armored car into a ditch, immobilizing one of the rebels' key assets. The coup attempt was rapidly losing momentum, and Rawlings had no other choice but to pull back to the Air Force Station, where he and a few loyal airmen lay low as daylight broke. Subsequently, loyal military units quickly organized to quash the mutiny. The 5th Battalion, once it recovered from the initial confusion, mustered troops to counterattack the rebels. A detachment of soldiers from the 5th Infantry and the Reconnaissance Regiment, led by Major Seydou Mahama, was dispatched to hunt down Rawlings. They tracked him to the Air Force Station where he had taken refuge. Outnumbered and outgunned, Rawlings was cornered and arrested that same morning. The arrest itself became the stuff of legend. It is said that Major Mahama personally seized Rawlings's pistol, struck the young officer with it, and reprimanded him.
You don't stage coups with a pistol.
The military government wasted no time making an example of the coup plotters. Rawlings and his 6 accomplices were charged with treason and mutiny, grave offenses that carried the death penalty. General Akufo's regime, eager to deter any further dissent in the ranks ahead of the looming elections, decided to stage a public court-martial to punish the ringleaders. Rawlings' trial opened in late May 1979 under intense public scrutiny. The proceedings took place at the Burma Hall in Accra's military barracks, a venue large enough to accommodate the crowds that gathered to witness the spectacle. You see, the court-martial was open to the public, and thousands of ordinary Ghanaians flooded into the hall, cramming the galleries to get a glimpse of the rebellious flight lieutenant on the dock. As the trial commenced, Rawlings and the other accused were brought before the panel of military judges. Immediately, the flight lieutenant set the tone defiantly. When asked by the tribunal whether he wished to be tried separately from his subordinates, Rawlings refused any special treatment.
"I want to be with my men,"
he declared. A simple statement that electrified the courtroom and drew wild applause from the crowd. What truly shook the proceedings, however, was Rawlings' own testimony. Rather than pleading for mercy or denying the charges, Rawlings seized the courtroom as a platform to deliver a searing indictment of the very regime trying him. In a speech that has since become part of Ghanaian history, the accused coup leader spoke with a mix of fury and conviction that left both the judges and spectators stunned.
"Now you listen to me well and good, because I am not here to make a speech, and I am not here to waste my time talking. First and foremost, let me inform you that I am not here to impose myself on 10 million citizens of this country. But I am telling you that I am here today, in the history of this country, to address myself to military senior officers, all those politicians, all those businessmen and foreign criminals who have used our blood, sweat, and tears, the tools of our laboring, to enrich themselves, to drown in wine and women, while the majority of us are daily struggling for survival. I am not an expert in economics, and I am not an expert in law, but I am an expert in working on an empty stomach while wondering when and where the next meal will come from. I am going to prove to you today that it is no longer a question of the military against the civilians. It is no longer a question of the Akan against the Ewe, the Ga against the Northerner, but a question of those who have against those who have not. A question of a vast majority of hungry people against a very tiny minority of greedy, inhumane, selfish senior officers, politicians, businessmen, and their bank managers. You and I are the bigger fools for allowing such a blatant abuse of human dignity for so long. 22 years after independence, you and I are still hitting our heads on the ground and leaving it all to God to save us one day. Let me tell you today that God will not help you, and the big men will not help you. Only you can help yourself.
Throughout this extraordinary oration, the court officers attempted to maintain order, but the atmosphere in Burma Hall had undergone a significant change. Many spectators were visibly moved, and bursts of applause kept breaking out despite the guards' attempts at silence. Insisting that he was solely responsible for the attempted coup, Rawlings demanded that his colleagues, charged with aiding him in the treasonable act, be set free.
Leave my men alone. I am responsible for everything.
This plea struck a chord with Ghana's lower ranks, but unsurprisingly, the military tribunal found him and the other plotters guilty of the mutiny. As a result, Rawlings was publicly sentenced to death by firing squad for treason. He was to be held in a military guardroom prison pending execution. However, if Akufo's regime expected Rawlings's conviction to frighten the public into submission, they gravely miscalculated. In fact, the opposite occurred. The trial had turned Rawlings into a popular hero. Many Ghanaians, reeling under economic injustice, heard in Rawlings's words their own simmering frustrations finally voiced on a public stage. The state-controlled media, perhaps to the regime's regret, even reported portions of Rawlings's defiant testimony, which spread rapidly through cities and villages. Rawlings languished in a military cell as May turned to June 1979, reportedly under harsh conditions. But by a twist of fate, he would not face the firing squad. Within the Ghanaian armed forces, especially among young officers and enlisted men, Rawlings's impact was profound. For those soldiers, Rawlings had articulated exactly what they felt, that a corrupt clique of big men had betrayed the ideals of the military and impoverished the nation. Among Rawlings's co-conspirators, Lieutenant Kojo Boakye John emerged as a key planner for the next steps. Boakye John, who had narrowly avoided being roped into the May 15th coup, felt both admiration and frustration with Rawlings's lone wolf action. However, he and others in the Free Africa movement decided that Rawlings's trial and death sentence forced their hand. They would have to fast forward their revolutionary timeline and strike now, rather than see their comrade executed. Quietly, Boakye John and a handful of sympathetic officers began contacting trusted soldiers across units to coordinate a rescue plan. At the Army's 5th Battalion, the same unit Rawlings had attempted to win over, junior officers like Lieutenant Acheampong began to quietly mobilize loyal men for action. They were soon joined by several disgruntled NCOs and soldiers. Names such as Corporal Peter Tasiri and Corporal Sarkodie Ado, among others, would later be recognized as being among the frontline conspirators. Meanwhile, the Akufo government grew increasingly uneasy about Rawlings's influence even behind bars. There were reports that leaflets with Rawlings's quotes were being clandestinely distributed in the capital, and the regime's intelligence warned of subversive conversations among junior soldiers. Yet Akufo's administration, fixated on the upcoming elections and convinced that Rawlings's supporters were mere fringe elements, was seemingly oblivious to the storm brewing in the barracks. Their official plan was to hold the first round of elections on June 18th before executing Rawlings and the other convicted mutineers once a civilian president was in place, so that the outgoing military regime wouldn't have blood directly on its hands. On Monday, June 4th, 1979, Ghana's military ranks erupted into a full-blown insurrection as small groups of rebellious soldiers moved into position in Accra. Their objective? To free Flight Lieutenant Jerry Rawlings from custody. At the Air Force Base in Accra, loyal airmen who had been part of Rawlings's failed mutiny regrouped. Simultaneously, at the barracks of the 5th Battalion, Lieutenant Acheampong and his men armed themselves and rallied sympathetic infantry troops. Elsewhere in the city, insurgent soldiers from the Reconnaissance Regiment readied armored cars and tanks. Crucially, none of the leading conspirators informed Rawlings of what was about to happen. He remained in his cell at Base Ordnance Corps Guard Room, unaware that rescue was on the way. In the early hours, gunfire rattled through Accra's military camps once again. But this time, it signaled a much larger mutiny. Rebel soldiers swiftly overwhelmed the few guard posts still loyal to the government. At the camp guard room, Rawlings and his fellow condemned officers awoke to the sound of shooting and shouting. Suddenly, the door to Rawlings's cell was flung open by a band of armed men in battle dress, their faces sweaty and determined. For a split second, he thought this might be a trick or assassination, perhaps government agents staging an escape attempt to shoot him while fleeing. But as the intruders saluted him and yelled that they were there to get him out, Rawlings realized the unbelievable. Soldiers of the Ghanaian army were breaking him out of jail. Rawlings, still wearing a prison-issue uniform and with his boots untied, was immediately rushed to the national radio station by the triumphant soldiers. At dawn, Ghanaians tuning their radios for the morning news heard an unexpected voice crackling over the airwaves. It was Rawlings, breathless, intense, and very much alive. Grabbing the microphone, Rawlings addressed his countrymen live on air.
Here to tell you just one or two things. If any further bloodshed had to be avoided in this country, everybody might have as well realized that the ranks have borne the brunt of the suffering of this country for too long. They want bloodshed. They want bloodshed. So for heaven's sake, do not beg in their way.
Rawlings did not proclaim himself head of state or declare martial law in the usual coup-maker fashion. Instead, he was essentially giving notice that a thorough purge or house cleaning was coming. He acknowledged that the future was uncertain, but emphasized that this uprising was born from Ghana's intolerable conditions and the people's hunger for justice. All across Ghana, people stopped what they were doing to listen. When it became clear that Akuffo's regime was indeed overthrown and the charismatic Rawlings was leading the charge, a wave of euphoria swept the populace. Many civilians poured onto the streets to support the uprising. They offered water and food to the rampaging soldiers and, in some cases, even joined in to point out known corrupt officials. At the broadcasting station, Rawlings concluded his announcement by letting the country know that a new Armed Forces Revolutionary Council, the AFRC, composed of a cross-section of junior ranks, would be in charge of restoring sanity and preparing the country for the scheduled elections. True to his word, the new AFRC allowed the planned elections of June 18, 1979, to go ahead on schedule. However, in the 112 days that Rawlings and the AFRC governed, they carried out drastic house-cleaning measures, including the execution of 8 top military officers for corruption, 3 of them former heads of state. It was an episode both cheered and mourned in Ghana's history. In the weeks that followed the June 4th uprising, the AFRC set up special military tribunals to try those deemed responsible for Ghana's current, horrible economic predicament. The most dramatic targets were the country's former military leaders themselves. In an extraordinary turn of events, 3 past heads of state, General Akwasi Afrifa, General Ignatius Acheampong, and General Fred Akuffo, and several senior officers were hauled before panels of junior soldiers and convicted of capital offenses. They were accused of using their positions to amass wealth while in office and recklessly dissipating state funds to the detriment of the country. The AFRC made clear that anyone found guilty of stealing from the nation would face the ultimate punishment, regardless of international protests. On June 16, 1979, Ghanaians awoke to the shocking news that former head of state General Acheampong and the former Border Guards commander, Major General E.K. Utuka, had been executed by firing squad. Acheampong, who had led Ghana from 1972 until 1978, had been overthrown by his fellow officers in an internal coup a year prior. Yet the AFRC deemed his misdeeds grave enough that he had to face the firing squad. 10 days later, on June 26, 1979, the revolution reached its bloody crescendo. Before sunrise, 6 more senior officers were executed by firing squad in Accra, this time in a highly public spectacle. Among them were General Frederick W.K. Akuffo, the very man Rawlings had ousted just 3 weeks prior, and Lieutenant General Akwasi Afrifa, a former head of state from an earlier era. They were joined in death by 4 other top commanders of the old regime: Rear Admiral Joy Amedume, the Navy Chief; Air Vice Marshal George Ya Boachie, the Air Force Chief; Major General Robert Kote, the Army Chief and one-time Chief of Defense Staff; and Colonel Roger Felly, the former Foreign Affairs Commissioner. In all, 8 men, the most senior ranks of Ghana's military establishment, had been condemned and executed. For Ghana, it was an almost unthinkable event. Never before had former heads of state been executed in public, and certainly not by their own army's junior ranks. Decades later, Rawlings admitted that some of the men executed, particularly General Afrifa, were in fact innocent and victims of a moral battle. However, he insisted he felt no regret over the executions. After the fury of June, Ghana's revolutionary summer of 1979 was surprisingly short-lived. Flight Lieutenant Rawlings had always insisted that the AFRC's rule was transitional, not a permanent regime. After 3 tumultuous months, he handed over power to an elected civilian president, Dr. Hilla Liman, on September 24, 1979. The country thus entered its 3rd republic, and many hoped the trauma was over.
The Armed Forces Revolutionary Council, during our short reign in power, have demonstrated openly what many people had only suspected before, namely, that the holding of office in government in this country had in almost all cases been used to plunder the wealth of the nation.
Ghana is looking up to you. Thank you.
As President Lamont took office, he inherited a populace both hopeful and fearful, a devastated economy, and a military still bristling with revolutionary zeal in its junior ranks. The AFRC had even sent many of its own firebrand members abroad for military education, partly to get them out of the way of the new government. Rawlings himself retreated into the background, for a time. However, the Lamont administration struggled from the start. His People's National Party government faced Herculean economic problems. Ghana's coffers were empty, inflation raged, and essential supplies were still scarce. Early enthusiasm waned as Ghanaians saw little quick improvement in their living conditions. To make matters worse, some elements of the old political class crept back into influence, and whispers of corruption or mismanagement began to circulate. Rawlings grew disillusioned as he watched from the sidelines. He felt the civilian leaders were squandering the sacrifices of the revolution. In private, Rawlings and a group of loyalists began plotting a dramatic comeback. And on the last day of 1981, they struck again. Rawlings led a small band of soldiers to overthrow President Lamont's government, accusing it of corruption and incompetence. This time, he made it abundantly clear that he wasn't conducting another house-cleaning exercise. Following this, Rawlings assumed the mantle of national leader once more, now as the chairman of a new junta called the Provisional National Defense Council, the PNDC. With his boundless charisma, Rawlings stood at the forefront, becoming a galvanizing figure who could one day mingle shirtless with dock workers and farmers, and the next, descend from a military helicopter to address adoring crowds chanting his name. Truly, he cultivated the image of a dynamic man of the people, an image that reinforced his reputation as Junior Jesus in the eyes of supporters, a nickname students and workers had given him for his near-messianic appeal. But the reality of governance soon tempered the revolution's idealism. By mid-1982, the PNDC was strained by internal divisions. Left-wing members pushed for socialist policies and even courted support from the Eastern Bloc, while more pragmatic officials warned that Ghana was bankrupt and needed Western aid to stave off collapse. A severe drought and bushfires in 1983, coupled with the mass expulsion of over 1 million Ghanaian migrant workers from Nigeria, created an economic emergency. Amid this turmoil, Rawlings made a pivotal decision to embrace an IMF-backed structural adjustment program to revive Ghana's economy. State enterprises were privatized, government spending was slashed, and market reforms were implemented. This marked a sharp departure from the PNDC's initial socialist rhetoric and infuriated the hardline leftists in Rawlings' coalition, who felt betrayed.
How is it you had the nerve to go to the IMF when other African countries in dire shape didn't think they could take that chance?
I knew it would create problems for us, but did we have any other alternative? Whether it was a question of the IMF or World Bank or the Soviet Union didn't really make any difference. We were suffering from a very serious economic malaise, and we needed to do something about it. And wherever we could get some very basic resources from, to start rejuvenating the national infrastructure, to start rejuvenating, the national economy.
Brand new tractors, brand new tractors. I'd like to come here in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years' time and see how many of these tractors will still be on road or, on the farms, functioning. What's going to be the lifespan of this expensive machine?
The early 1980s saw multiple coup attempts against the PNDC from various quarters, from disaffected leftists, disillusioned army officers, to supporters of the old Lamont regime. However, the most chilling challenge to Rawlings' legitimacy came in June 1982. On the night of June 30th, 1982, 3 high court judges and a retired army officer were abducted from their homes in Accra by a group of soldiers. They were driven in an army jeep to the Bundase military shooting range in the Accra Plains, where they were shot and murdered. In an attempt to cover up the crime and destroy evidence, the perpetrators doused the bodies in petrol and set them on fire. However, a heavy downpour that night partially extinguished the flames, leaving the charred remains to be discovered 3 days later by a farmer. This incident sent shockwaves throughout Ghana. Although Rawlings denied ordering these killings, many Ghanaians held his PNDC responsible for creating an atmosphere that enabled such lawlessness. Following a massive public outcry and pressure from the Ghana Bar Association and civil society, the PNDC government established a special investigations board to investigate the crime. Their investigation led to the identification and arrest of 5 primary suspects: Joachim Amarte Quay, a PNDC member, Lance Corporal Samuel K. Amadeka, Lance Corporal Michael Senya, Johnny Zandu, and Evans Tekpor Heckley. The 5 primary suspects were tried before a national public tribunal. During the trial in June 1983, Amadeka escaped from prison during a failed coup attempt and fled the country, remaining a fugitive to this day. The remaining 4 were found guilty and sentenced to death by firing squad in August 1983. Amarte Quay, Johnny Zandu, and Michael Senya were executed, while Tekpor Heckley had already been executed earlier for his involvement in the failed coup. Subsequently, some key allies deserted Rawlings and the PNDC over this incident. Among those who resigned in protest was a young John Kufuor, a PNDC appointee who would later become president in 2001, and the Chief of Defense Staff, Brigadier Joseph Nunu Mensah. Despite these crises, Rawlings proved to be a shrewd survivor. He cracked down ruthlessly on dissent, detaining or forcing into exile both ultra-leftists and rival military officers who challenged him. You see, the PNDC regime was marked by repeated human rights abuses, political detainees held without trial, occasional executions of alleged plotters, and a relentless crackdown on press freedom. For most of the 1980s, Ghana experienced what was called a culture of silence, where fear kept open criticism of Rawlings to a minimum. However, by the late 1980s, Ghana's fortunes began to turn. The strict economic reforms, though painful, yielded results. Inflation was brought under control, industries revived, and Ghana earned praise from the World Bank as an African success story. Furthermore, Rawlings' government began to slowly mend fences with the international community. He distanced himself from his early alliances with Libya's Muammar Gaddafi and Cuba's Fidel Castro, and grew closer to Western leaders.
Some of the students we talked to said, he's a soft dictator. A dictator, but a soft dictator. Fair?
If I were, I wouldn't be as frustrated as I am.
But will people have a right to vote you out? And the party out?
I'm saying that we can vote people in and out. Personalities, okay? But my dear, what we need to do in this country is to establish a situation where even if it was the devil who should come and sit on top of us in Ghana, by virtue of certain procedures, certain practices, the devil cannot get away with doing whatever he wants. He would necessarily have to do what the people expect of him. I don't know if you appreciate what I'm talking about. So that Rawlings being here or out is not really important.
In the early 1990s, pressures mounted on the PNDC to democratize. The Cold War had ended, and multi-party democracy was sweeping across Africa. Perhaps recognizing the changing tides, Rawlings moved to transition Ghana back to constitutional governance. A new constitution was drafted, guaranteeing civil liberties and multi-party elections, and in 1992, Ghana's Fourth Republic was born. Rawlings, who resigned from the Air Force to run as a civilian, founded the National Democratic Congress Party and campaigned for president. Leveraging his populist credentials and the improvements in the economy, he won the November 1992 election, becoming the first president of the Fourth Republic. Many opposition figures, however, alleged that the elections had been tilted by Rawlings's incumbency and residual intimidation. Indeed, the main opposition boycotted the subsequent parliamentary polls, complaining of unfair conditions, leading to a virtually one-party parliament in Rawlings' first term. Nonetheless, Rawlings sought to legitimize his rule in the eyes of the world and history. He was re-elected in 1996 in a much more competitive election that observers judged largely free. As a civilian president, Rawlings surprised some by respecting certain constitutional limits. He tolerated a burgeoning private press, though not without occasional harassment of journalists, and allowed opposition activities, a far cry from the revolutionary tribunals of his earlier days. During this era, Ghana experienced relative stability and economic growth. The government invested in infrastructure, liberalized many sectors of the economy, and Ghana's cities saw a flourishing middle class. Before you know it, a new generation of Ghanaians came of age with no memory of the chaotic 1970s. But despite this, the shadow of Rawlings' past never fully disappeared. Political opponents frequently reminded the public of the violent excesses under Rawlings' watch. To his critics, he remained the man with blood on his hands, an ex-military strongman who had executed opponents and ruled by the gun. However, Rawlings himself remained deeply conscious of his image and legacy. As the year 2000 approached, Ghana prepared for a historic political moment. You see, the new democratic institution now in place had provided term limits, which meant Rawlings had to step down after serving 2 elected terms. In January 2001, the ex-flight lieutenant handed over the presidency to opposition leader John Kufuor, who had won the December 2000 elections. Indeed, Ghana in 2001 was at peace and on a path of regular elections, outcomes far from guaranteed when Rawlings first seized power. His legacy as a nation builder was acknowledged even by some skeptics, who conceded that Rawlings had presided over Ghana's turnaround from economic collapse to stability. In the years after leaving office, Rawlings remained an influential voice in Ghana. He took on statesman-like roles, such as serving as the African Union envoy to Somalia in the 2010s. However, on the 12th of November 2020, Jerry John Rawlings would pass away in Accra at the age of 73 after a short illness. The nation observed an official mourning period, and Rawlings was given a solemn state funeral in January 2021 with full military honors. Dignitaries from around the world attended, paying respects to a man who had come to embody Ghana's modern journey. During the funeral proceedings at Black Star Square in Accra, jets roared in a flypast, and cannons fired a 21-gun salute, a fitting tribute to the Air Force officer who had left such a mark on his country.